From WFIU in Bloomington, Indiana, I'm Kate Young, and this is Earth Eats.
Acorns are, they're everywhere. They are incredibly abundant, and they've been a really important food source for humans in essentially every region of the planet that had oak trees, which is almost every temperate zone on the entire globe. But we don't do much of acorn eating anymore as people and as communities in most places.
Graphic novelist Mel Gilman made an instructional zine about eating acorns, and this week on Earth Eats Wild, they talk with us about this abundant food source and why comics can be an ideal medium for learning about foraging. That conversation's just ahead. Stay with us. Thanks for listening to Earth Eats Wild. I'm Kate Young. Acorns are probably one of the most recognizable wild foods in the U.S. A lot of us have grown up seeing acorns scattered under oak trees in the fall. And maybe, like me, you watched a film reel in third grade with a reenactment of indigenous folks grinding acorns with stones and making flatbreads over open fires. And maybe, like me, that film reel inspired you to bite into an acorn the next time you saw one, only to promptly spit it out due to excessive bitterness. I must have missed some steps in that educational film strip about indigenous foodways. So naturally, when I recently came across a beautifully illustrated zine all about foraging acorns for food, I was pretty excited. Graphic novelist Mel Gilman is the author of that zine, and I got the chance to meet up with him in a park adjacent to a public library in the fall of 2024. It was raining, but we had umbrellas. You'll hear the patter. It sounds a bit like static, but it's not. It's rain. Okay, so we are outside of the Columbus Metropolitan Library here in Columbus, Ohio. And is this the park you were talking about?
This is the topiary garden out here, and we are surrounded by lots of beautiful mature oak trees, and when I was living in Columbus, this was one of my favorite parks to come and collect acorns at.
Oh, that's fantastic. Okay, how convenient.
Absolutely, one-stop shopping. Yeah, we have many different types of oak species out here. Right now we are walking past both some white oaks that look like they have not dropped too many acorns this season. They sometimes will take years off to help control pest populations because there are weevil species that love to eat acorns. And but this tree, the red oak over here, does have some acorns on the ground that we can see here. So for me as a acorn forager, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll come out and try to find the ones that look just, the most complete. You don't want any damaged shells. If you find ones where the cap is still firmly attached to the acorn, then that is probably a sign that the acorn itself is not a mature nut. The tree might have essentially aborted it, but sometimes if you can... Yeah, this one, they don't want to let me pop the cap off. Sometimes you can pop the cap off on your own and it'll work. But if the cap has come off cleanly, that's a sign, generally, that the nut inside is mature and is more likely to be healthy. So these are the ones that I'm looking for. It's a little bit controversial among acorn foragers whether you should collect the green ones that are on the ground, but in my experience, if you get a good, healthy green acorn where the cap comes off easily, you can leave it in a sunny window for a couple weeks and it will ripen.
Okay, so normally, if they're fully ripened, they're going to be brown.
Typically, yes. If they are fully ripened and dry, they're going to turn brown, and that's typically when they're at the best stage for processing. So generally what I'll do is I'll come out and collect them while they are green from the ground, and then I will leave them in oftentimes pie containers, like a single layer of acorns in a sunny window so they can dry out and turn brown in the sun. And they smell wonderful when you do that, by the way. The smell of acorns always permeates my apartment in the fall, and it's delightful. This beautiful woody, oaky scent that you get out of them. Takes a couple weeks, and then once they are dry, the shells will be stiff enough that they are easy to crack open. And from there you get the nut meat out and you get to processing.
Okay, so what's the controversy? Just that you should be saving the green ones for other creatures, or they're just not going to be good until they're brown?
What I have heard from other people is there are some people who think that if you collect the green ones, they will not ripen on a sunny window. But in my experience, they do. And also, I have learned that if you wait until they turn brown on the ground, because they're ripening in the sun on the ground here the same way they would in a window, and if you wait until they ripen on the ground, the squirrels will get all of the good ones first. So if you want to get a crack at them, it's better to collect when they are green.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Now, what about size? Do you try to look for species that have bigger ones?
Yes, and actually we could walk a little bit further into the park and I could show you more acorns. The ones that I'm holding in my hand right now come from a red oak tree, and these are large enough to be processed. For radio listeners, these are about the size of a marble, maybe a little bit bigger, but we are heading towards a bur oak tree, which is one of my absolute favorite trees to forage from because they can sometimes have golf ball sized acorns.
Wow.
Yeah, you're getting a lot of bang for your $0 buck picking up free food off the ground here. We'll see if there's any underneath this tree in front of us. The squirrels also love these, so you are in competition with the wildlife always.
Oh, I see the burrs. The burrs are really furry. You know, I saw these one time and I had no idea what they were. I was like, what can this be? I mean, it looks like an acorn, but it can't be.
Yeah, they have these beautiful distinctive caps on them that have this very mossy appearance, and they're a much bigger cap than you oftentimes think when you think about what an acorn looks like. And you can tell by the depression left on the inside that these were big, like honkin' acorns that you would get inside these. But these are one of our, native species here in the Midwest, and they are a wonderful source of food for both wildlife and humans. There is a long history of indigenous practices of foraging, these and other types of acorns in this region. And for me personally, I love these ones because they're so big that makes it really fast to collect them. I can, on a good day, I can pick up like a pillowcase full of these in like an hour maybe, and that's a lot of food that you're getting pretty quickly. And they're very easy to process because they come out of the shells very easily once they have dried and cured, and they have a lot of nut meat on the inside, so they're very useful for us as humans. When you find a whole one, which we're not seeing too many of right now.
Yeah, let's look around, see if we can find one. Yeah, no, they are going for it. Oh, there's one.
So here is
a small one.
Yeah, a small one that the squirrels either missed or left behind. So you can see the acorn in its little mossy cap. The cap covers most of the acorn, which is very cute. So if it'll let me, we can try to peel off the cap here.
Everything's a little harder because we're holding our umbrellas.
Yeah, and this one, since this is a nice dark brown color, this is closer to what you would expect out of a mature acorn. We'll see if the cap will come off for me here without. Normally I would be doing this with tools. So it came out pretty cleanly.
Oh, it's beautiful. It looks like a chestnut. It's almost the size of a chestnut too.
Yeah, and this is actually a fairly small one. I would describe this as being somewhere between a marble and a golf ball, kind of at the halfway point between those two.
Yep.
I don't have my nutcracker on me, but I could step on this so we could crack it open and I could show you the nut meat on the inside.
Okay.
All right. Get that crunch. Let's see what we got. There we go.
Wow.
Yeah, so this is actually not a bad looking one. You see the nut meat on the inside is very clean and kind of a pale yellow color. This one has not fully dried yet, and another nice thing about this is I'm not seeing any evidence of weevils on the inside, which is good. Sometimes you do crack open an acorn and you find that a little weevil larva is living inside of it. And again, they're part of the food system out here too, and squirrels actually love eating the acorn weevil larva too, just as much as they love eating the...
It's like a bonus for them.
Yeah, a little extra protein. They are edible for humans too. I have been told, I have not tried them myself, but I've been told that if you can roast them and they taste kind of like popcorn. So there you go.
Okay.
Oh yeah,
there's one too, yeah.
This one looks a little bit more damaged.
Yeah, it does. It does.
You know, since we're on a park lawn out here, you know, people do mow the lawn out here, and sometimes that will damage the acorns. Oh, there's
one that's, oh no, it looks like it's been cracked open and eaten.
Again, squirrels got here first. Maybe this one.
Oh, that's a good looking one. And that's what...
Yeah, this is an unripe one, definitely. But you leave this on a kitchen counter and it would mature.
You would definitely want to take that outer shell off of it, right?
Yes.
If you could. If you could pry it off.
Yeah. Since this one is pretty fresh off the tree, it's still green and, you know, young and juicy. If I tried to peel off the mossy cap from around it, it would be pretty difficult right now.
Oh, okay. So you would kind of dry it on the counter first
I would
with
let
that.
this one dry out first.
Oh, these are great. I know of at least one bur oak on our campus too, so I'm going to have to go check it out this year.
Yeah, they really are, you know, a wonderful, beneficial tree. One of the beautiful things about oaks in general too in this region, you know, in the Midwest, in Appalachia, in the whole eastern seaboard region of the United States, is oaks are, in terms of biodiversity, they support a wider range of insect species than any other native tree that we have growing in this region. So more caterpillars, more insects are supported by oaks generally than any other type of tree that we have growing in this region. So they're very beneficial for insects and for the birds that rely on insects for their protein to fuel their migratory flights, and they're useful as pollinators. You know, this is an important tree for various parts of our ecosystem out here.
Well, and it sounds like the insects that are supported by it are not necessarily killing the trees.
No, generally not. Most of the insects that are supported by oak trees are caterpillars that are eating the leaves but not defoliating the entire tree, or they are, you know, weevil species that are eating some of the nuts but not all of the nuts, and the trees are also going into, you know, they have boom and bust cycles where they will have a bunch of acorns that they produce in one year and then no acorns that they produce the next year, which helps to keep the pest populations in check. So the weevils are being managed by the trees itself, and also by, you know, squirrels that eat them and humans that will, remove weevils from the local area by collecting acorns. And the caterpillars are eating the leaves but not defoliating the whole tree. So lots of insects that are being supported here. The nice thing about acorns is that all acorns are edible. If you find an acorn and you process it correctly, it is something you can eat. There are no poisonous acorns as long as you are processing them. So it's just a matter of which ones are in abundance in your area and which ones are a large enough size that they are, you know, good for harvesting and efficient for turning into flour.
Yeah, the one time that I harvested a whole bunch of acorns with the intention of processing them, it was because they were so large and there were so many of them that I just couldn't resist. I was like, this is food. I've got to pick it up.
Yes, absolutely. And you can be kind of overwhelmed by the amount of food that one tree can produce. It's really an abundant food source that we're not using very heavily right now in most communities. So we're a little behind on this one too. It looks like the acorns here probably dropped a few weeks ago and squirrels have gotten most of them. But you can see how many caps are on the ground, which is evidence of just how many nuts were being produced by this tree. It is a very large amount of a nut crop that is being dropped by even just a small little tree in the middle of a public park here.
Yeah. And they look like they're about the size of a hazelnut.
Yes, yeah, about hazelnut size. So there's one other oak a little bit that direction that I oftentimes pick from. We could see if it has anything. But we've managed to hit several different species of oak just in a small little public park outside of a library. And, you know, if we had been here 2 weeks ago, we could have filled some whole bags with acorns here.
Oh, yeah, these are those long kind.
Yeah. We have a longer kind of oval-shaped acorns here, and it looked like the squirrel was still able to find ones that it was interested in eating. For me as a person, most of these look a little bit overcooked in the sun to me, but you might, if you spent some time picking through, you might still be able to find some good nuts on the ground here.
And do they tend to drop them kind of all at once? Like, it's not like there's still some up there?
There's oftentimes 2 drops that happen in a season. There's an early drop where the tree is often aborting acorns that have insect infestations or mold or other things that are damaging the nut on the inside. It'll drop those first, so that's the early drop. And then a couple weeks later, it'll have its real drop where all of the viable seeds are dropped from the tree. And that's typically when you want to time your harvesting, is going out for that second drop where you're getting the crop of nuts that oftentimes has fewer, insect damage, mold issues, etc.
Now, do you think that there's any concern about over-harvesting when it comes to acorns? And I'm guessing from what you just said, like, especially in a park like this, none of the seeds that drop from this are going to turn into trees. So is it more about wildlife then?
Yeah, I think this question really depends on where you are, and you have to pay attention to what you're seeing on the ground around you. If we're in a healthy urban public park where the only wildlife that we're worried about supporting are, the handful of squirrels in the park, I would not really be concerned about over-harvesting in a place like this. If you're out in the woods, though, and let's say it's in a year where, I mentioned that acorns have boom and bust cycles. Let's say you're in a bust year and there's not many acorns out there and you're in the woods and you know that these acorns do need to be eaten by hungry animals, maybe that's a year where I would show a little bit more restraint. With foragers, we also like to have kind of rules of thumb that we set for ourselves. Some people like to say, take no more than 10% of whatever it is that you find. And if you were to apply that to acorn foraging, I mean, if you took 10% of the acorns you were finding on the ground, you would still be coming home with way more than you could eat as a single person. So
yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So not something you have to pay a whole lot of attention to.
Yeah, it's all about common sense and kind of treating it as a shared resource in community with you and the wildlife around you. Oh, there's a pretty good one.
Yeah.
I wanted to see if there was some weevil damage we could look at inside this one. Yes.
And there's some damage.
Yeah, so that's actually what the weevil damage looks like. You can see some dark brown streaks inside the acorn, and those are actually the paths that the little weevil larva will have eaten through the nut. Mature weevil will lay its eggs inside the acorn, and then the weevil larva will grow inside the nut, and it will feast on the nut meat inside the acorn. And then once the larva has emerged and the acorn has dropped to the ground, the larva will chew its way out of the acorn from the inside and then burrow into the ground and continue its life cycle down there before it emerges as an adult to repeat the process.
Luckily, not all of the acorns had weevil damage. I'm talking with Mel Gilman, graphic novelist and experienced forager, author of zines about wild fruit, mushrooms, and acorns, which is the subject of today's episode of Eats Wild. After a quick break, we'll return to our conversation, this time inside the public library where we took shelter from the rain. Stay with us. Kate Young here. This is Eats Wild, a special series on Earth Eats all about wild food and foraging. Today we're talking with Mel Gilman. After we got out of the rain and settled into a study room at the public library in Columbus, Ohio, I asked Mel for a reintroduction.
My name is Mel Gilman, they, them pronouns for me, and I am a graphic novelist. I'm the author of several different books, including a series of zines that I self-publish all about foraging. And on top of that, I am also the new department chair of the comics BFA and MFA programs out at California College of the Arts.
That's a recent position, and you just moved from Columbus, Ohio.
That is correct. Up until August of this year, I have been living in Columbus, Ohio, and I have been learning about wild food and foraging for the years that I've spent out here. And now I'm in the Bay Area, and I'm going to have to start all over again, learning all the new species in a whole different ecosystem.
Could you tell us about the zines that you've made?
Definitely. So one of the things that I really love about comics is that because they are a visual and a textual medium, they're so good for education purposes. It is so easy and digestible to learn things in comics form. So the very first foraging zine that I ended up making was a how-to comic about eating acorns specifically, because acorns are, they're everywhere, they are incredibly abundant, and they've been a really important food source for humans in essentially every region of the planet that had oak trees, which is almost every temperate zone on the entire globe. But we don't do much of acorn eating anymore as people and as communities in most places.
So let's go back to the zine a little bit and tell me what you did in the zine, how you approached it.
Sure. So for the zine, what I wanted to do was have a complete little booklet that could walk a beginner forager who doesn't know anything about acorns or anything about acorn foraging through the process step by step. Here's how you collect the acorns. Here's how you dry them. Here's what you need to know about the weevil larva that will sometimes sneak into the acorns that you brought home. Here is how you do the water leaching method to remove the tannins from the acorns, and then ending the zine with here is a group of easy recipes that you could use the acorn flour that you have now made. So my goal was to have something that is a single package that is visual, and again, that's the beauty of comics, is that they're so digestible and so easy to learn from. I also wanted the zine to feel very personal and handmade, so there are some very unique touches to the book design. Things like I used acorns to dye a skein of yarn, and every zine has hand-stitched binding with yarn that I dyed using acorns, and I also use actual oak leaves to stamp the inside end papers of the zine, so every book features these original stamped oak leaf designs, and it's those little personal touches that make it feel like this is a book that has been made by human hands. And I think that is, part of what we're thinking about when we're thinking about acorn processing in general. We're thinking about this very personal and very, very human activity of going out and collecting food and turning it into sustenance and nutrition, and using that as a way to connect with the plants and the trees and the wildlife that are in a part of our community and our ecosystem. And there's something about zines, there's something about handmade objects, and something about books that have that personal touch that could only come from the hand of the author. It means that the books take longer for me to produce, but it also means that each one is personal and special in a way that you wouldn't get out of a mass-produced book. And that's one of the wonderful things about zines in general.
Mel has 3 zines about foraging: Eating Acorns, Fruit for Free, and Fungi Feast. I asked Mel about their approach to these projects and about what comics can do that, say, a field guide with photographs might not be able to do.
One thing that I often think about is how one of the advantages of comics is that we're using the language of caricature in order to communicate things like species ID. So if we think about caricature, where you can draw an image of a person where their face is not being rendered in a photorealistic way, but we are amplifying certain features to make them more immediately and easily recognizable. And that is one of the beautiful powers of comics and how it works in human brains and human learning. And that was the approach that I took to foraging comics and to mushroom comics, was let's treat the way that I am illustrating these mushroom species not as if I am drawing one single particular individual specimen that I found on this one day in this one park, but rather thinking about what are the general attributes of this mushroom, what are the things that I am looking for as a active forager, and how can I communicate those visually on the page to create essentially a caricature, a recognizable caricature of these mushrooms, and have that be something which people can hopefully learn from. And again, we always have to say that, you should never ever use one book, one resource, one source for, safe and effective foraging. But comics has some unique attributes that I think make it one useful part of the overall educational landscape of resources that are available to us as foragers trying to learn about this practice.
One of the things that I noticed from looking at the fruit zine, which is the one I've spent the most time with because I have a paper copy of it, and so I've really looked at it, is there's a lot of playfulness and joy that is expressed in that comic. And I just wondered if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. Foraging shouldn't be drudgery. There's no reason to go out and try to be collecting wild food from your neighborhoods if you are not also finding joy in the practice. And for me, foraging is something that is just a delightful part of my life right now. It is something where I get to go walk around outside. I get to learn more about the species and the ecosystem that I am a part of. And I get to essentially, in a weird way, build community with the trees and the landscape around me. I have, groves of pawpaws that I've been visiting for upwards of like 5 years at this point, and I've, watched trees grow up. I have built relationships with these plants in a way. So in the zine, one of the beautiful things about comics too is that you're able to marry personal reflections about the topic that you're talking about with the educational, the nonfiction aspects where you're teaching people about what you know about these plants and these practices. And comics is a really wonderful way to marry those two. So you get a lot of my personality and my joy of foraging that comes through on the page. And that's also done deliberately too, because I do genuinely want to encourage more people to go out and try this and to feel like this is something safe and fun and exciting that they can do with the proper education and the proper resources, and to not feel so intimidated by it. In the US, we are oftentimes very scared of foraging because we are afraid of, poisoning ourselves. It's not something that we do regularly together in most cases. So you need to express the joy in it too in order to get people to feel more comfortable with the idea. And that was part of my task with this zine.
Could you talk a little bit more about why you think a foraging practice is an important thing for people to pursue?
I have a lot of different answers about this because I spend a lot of time thinking about this, but the biggest thing for me is that I think one of the problems that we are facing, in the United States as a country right now is we are not making it very accessible for many people to feel like an active participant in a community which is more than just humans. We do not encourage people to think about themselves as being an animal within an ecosystem, which is on a very literal level what humans are and have always been. And one of the things that foraging does is it gets you out of your house and it gets you thinking about the plants and the insects and the wildlife who are members of the community around you. And you start thinking about that web of interconnection, and you start thinking of yourself more as just another piece of that puzzle. You are another animal who is there eating from the trees in the same way that the squirrels and the raccoons and the insects do. So it shifts your mindset. And when that mindset shift happens, I think it also changes your behavior in an interesting way. For me, foraging was a straight shot into starting to think more about what are the invasive species in my area? What are the ecological challenges that are threatening the native species that are so crucial for the ecosystem, the keystone species that are holding everything together out here? Things like the oaks, the pawpaws, the spice bush, all of these really important native species, and thinking about what can I do as a person to utilize the resources, the time that I have in order to help these plants and all of the species that depend on them in my local ecosystem. So there's a way in which foraging encourages you to step back into that mindset of it is okay to play an active role as an active participant in the ecosystem around you, and the ecosystems around us really need human help in many cases. Invasive plants are going to continue to be a threat in every area where humans are not actively going in and trying to manage them and trying to make more room for the native plants and try to preserve those places where the native plants and all the wildlife that rely on them are growing and thriving. We need that human interaction and we need those human hands to get involved. And foraging is a way that connects people to their landscape and creates that spark where you want to go out and you want to be helping. And I think we need more people doing exactly that right now, because there are many parts of the ecosystems around us that are in crisis, and there are practical things that people can be doing in their local areas to help. But if they aren't going into those weird little wild spaces and exploring and getting invested and thinking and educating themselves about it, then you're never out there in the places that need your help. And that's been the biggest shift for me, thinking about becoming an active participant in the ecosystem around me.
And what do you think could be the benefits for the individuals who are doing it, even if they maybe don't take that extra step of like, okay, now I'm going to go out and pull garlic mustard or whatever, if they're just sticking to kind of a foraging practice, but it's something that they've discovered?
I mean, there's also the food sovereignty angle to this whole issue too, where we could think about how in many ways the food system that we have built in the US is very resource heavy and has a lot of negative aspects to it. And if you can shift, obviously no one right now in the US is going to very easily be able to shift their entire food source over to foraging. That would be incredibly difficult to do for most people. But, you shift a little bit over and you are giving yourself an activity where you are going outside, you are going into nature, you are paying attention to the plants that are growing around you in your community, you are getting free food out of it, you are trying new things, you are exploring new flavors and new culinary possibilities, and you are getting outside and doing something active and fun, and it's something you can involve, community members, friends, family, kids in. There's a lot of fun to this. For me, my foraging practice specifically started during the pandemic because I realized this could be kind of an ideal pandemic hobby because you are going outside, you don't have to be around other humans, and you are also finding a way to harvest food so you're not going into grocery stores in the middle of like the worst parts of 2020. This was something that I was trying to do more and more of, but it also became very healthy feeling in terms of being outside, being active, being in nature, and learning something new, trying something new, and connecting more to your local natural environment.
Yeah, I definitely think there are mental health benefits to it, even if it's just like what they call forest bathing. Just being in the woods can just be so great. And also the kind of sense of immediacy. Like you don't get to really put off harvesting certain things because they just have a tiny window.
Yeah, the acorns are going to drop when the acorns are going to drop, and you are either there on that day to get your little portion of the harvest, or the squirrels are going to get it for you. And that's one of the things that I think also is beautiful about this as a practice too, is you learn the seasonal rhythms of your own particular your area. You learn what to pay attention to, and you have things that you are looking forward to. I spend all year dreaming about like the 2-week period where there's going to be American persimmons in the parking lot near the botanical gardens or whatnot, and I can go out and collect them and then have my first taste of like persimmon muffins that I make for myself, which are incredible. And that's something you look forward to every year. And, every month there's going to be something out there that you are looking forward to, a seasonal taste, a seasonal food that you cannot get from stores, and it's only available at this one particular time in these locations, these secret spots that you know about and are like protecting, and that is one of the really fun parts about it.
I wanted to get back to the acorns themselves. Mel mentioned earlier that acorns have been an important food source for humans in the past, but these days we don't really make the most of this abundant wild crop. I asked Mel to talk about why that might be.
Acorns do require a very specific process before you can eat them. Acorns are very high in tannins, which makes the nut meat very bitter. So you wouldn't want to just grab an acorn off the ground and chomp right into it. It would not taste very good, and you probably would not enjoy the experience. But tannins are very easy to leach out of acorns in water. So what you generally need to do is you need to grind the acorns up after you've allowed them to dry in a sunny window for a couple weeks, and then you put the ground up acorn meat into a jug of water and leave it in your fridge, and then dump off the water every day. And every time you dump off the water and refill the jug, more of the tannins from the acorns will leach out. And after you've done that for a week or two, depending on how full of tannins the particular acorns you are working with are, you will end up with edible and palatable nut flour, essentially.
Does the leaching take out any of the nutrients? Like that's sort of a concern for me about like so much water processing. Like, do you lose a lot with that?
On one hand, we may not know the answer to this because there aren't very many people who have been studying the nutritional properties of acorns, because this is not a commercial food source right now. So our data is limited on this. But speaking from personal experience, what I have seen coming out of acorn flour when you do this leaching process, the thing that you'll notice is that the tannins color the water in a very particular way. The water, when it is full of tannins, turns like a brown or an orange or a pinkish color, and that's what you're dumping off. And then the acorn nut meat rests at the bottom of the jar because it's much heavier than the water. It sits at the bottom, so you're not dumping that off. You do sometimes lose a little bit of the acorn starch when you are dumping off the water, so it's possible that you're losing some of the carbohydrates from the acorn, which are actually a really important part of what makes acorns a important food source, especially for, Stone Age and ancestral communities, where carbohydrates were oftentimes one of the hardest things to come by in terms of nutrition. So acorns were actually a really important food source for that reason, even if in, contemporary times we're more likely to be like, maybe we're okay with losing some of the carbohydrates off of the acorn flour that we're producing. But those are the main things that I am able to see getting lost. And I think that if we wanted to do a more complete nutritional analysis of comparing pre-leached to post-leached acorn flour, that would be something that someone in a lab would need to do, and I would be very excited to hear those results.
Yeah, I want to hear those results too. What about flavor? Do they have a distinctive flavor, or is it really more like, hey, this is a good food source and it's got a lot of nutrients, we should be eating it?
I'll admit that straight up acorn flour doesn't have a strong flavor to it. I will say that when I am making baked goods out of acorn flour, and I do make, breads and brownies and cookies and, anything that you would make with regular flour out of it, and when I give them to other people to eat and kind of comment on, a lot of times they like to describe the flavor as being kind of hobbity. It feels like something that you would get served in a like a Tolkien novel or a Redwall novel, something like that. You get a little bit of that nuttiness to it, but it's very subtle. So not a strong flavor that's going to be there in the acorns themselves, but it is still a very versatile flour that you can use for a lot of baked goods. And again, it's going to be coming in with a lot of good, like healthy proteins, healthy fats and carbohydrates. And it's a rich food source that has been an important part of humans' diets for a very long time.
Yeah, and the hobbity thing makes me think that most wild foods that I eat, part of the enjoyment has to do with that it's a wild food and I harvested it. Yeah.
Yeah, I will say, and this is a straight up brag right here, I have a acorn pancake recipe that I tested out on a group of friends on a cabin weekend earlier this year, and it absolutely blew all of their minds. They are still talking about it to this day. Sometimes that wild food texture and richness and the depth of flavor that you're getting, even if it's not something that we are able to kind of consciously put our finger on what quality it is that we are tasting, I think there's a complexity to the flavor profile that people find very interesting and very attractive when you are able to put it in front of them. And again, the novelty is so fun too. It's so fun to get to feed friends things that you have made out of acorns, because where else do they get the chance to experience that?
Thank you so much. This has just been a delight. I appreciate you spending the time with me.
Oh my gosh, the pleasure is all mine. I love getting to talk about wild food in general and acorns especially. They have a very special place in my heart. Thank you.
That was Mel Gilman, graphic novelist, experienced forager, and maker of illustrated educational zines about enjoying wild foods. There's one about acorns, one about fruit, and one about mushrooms. Mel Gilman is the author of the graphic novels As the Crow Flies, Stage Dreams, and most recently, Other Ever Afters. And they are the department chair of the Comics BFA and MFA programs at California College of the Arts in San Francisco. They moved to the Bay Area last year from Columbus, Ohio. We met up in Columbus in fall of 2024 during the Comics Crossroads Columbus Fest, which took place at the public library. You can find links to learn more about Mel Gilman and their work on our website in its new location, ipm.org/show/eartheats. That's ipm.org/show/eartheats. This is Earth Eats Wild. I'm Kate Young, and after a short break, I'll take a stab at making some acorn flour of my own. Stay with us. We're back. I'm Kate Young, and this is Eats Wild, our special wild food series here on Earth Eats. Talking to Mel Gilman and reading their zine about foraging and cooking with acorns, I got inspired to gather some of my own. I went to the bur oak tree that I knew about on the IU campus. The acorns are so big, you really do get more bang for your buck than if you harvest the smaller ones. I gathered enough to fill a half-sheet baking pan where I spread them out to dry. My understanding was that I should let the acorns dry and then grind them up into flour and then start doing the leaching process. But I was concerned that I didn't really have the tools to do the grinding of dried acorns. So I decided to go ahead and crack them open and get all the shells off of them and grind them in my food processor because I felt like my blade could handle them while they're still sort of like just regular nut meats. I was afraid they're going to get too hard and difficult to grind. I noticed that as soon as I cracked them open and got the shells off of them, they would start to oxidize and get a little darker in color. Like when you first open them up, they're just creamy white. They're beautiful. And then they start getting this kind of brownish pinkish color. And so I've been moving kind of quickly. I just crack them, drop them into the food processor, and get them grinding. It's not a super smooth flour. It's not like, all-purpose flour. It's more like almond flour. It has that kind of nutty, grainy kind of feel to it. And then I'm just putting the flour into a big jar of water where I'm going to be trying to leach out those tannins, those bitter tannins that are in the acorn flour. I noticed when I first opened the food processor lid, there's sort of a sulfury smell coming from it. It's pretty mild. And when I hold the flour right up to my nose, I don't smell it. But just like when I first open it, it's like this little release of a sulfur kind of smelling gas. I think what I should probably do, though, is taste this acorn flour at this stage, just to kind of see how far we have to go. So these acorns are bur oak acorns. And I have to say, while I am definitely tasting the tannins, I am not getting that extreme bitterness that I associate with acorns. So I'm hoping that this process isn't going to take that many batches of water, just because it's really not that bitter. It doesn't have a particularly distinctive or interesting flavor either, but it's not inedible. Now, I think that the tannins actually probably aren't something that you want to be trying to digest anyway, so I'm not going to eat a bunch of this or anything. I just wanted to taste it and to see how bitter it really is. And then I'll just taste it after each batch and see what I think. And then I'm just using a funnel and a spatula to get the ground up flour into the water. I'm going to top this off with a little bit more water. They're going to sit in this water for a bit, and then we're going to pour off the water. That's how you get rid of all of the bitter tannins in acorn flour. You just soak it in water, cold water, and then you just keep pouring off the water, replacing it, pouring off the water, replacing it, until you get to a substance that is not bitter. So, after storing the ground acorns and water in the fridge for half a day, it's time for the next step. We're going to be emptying the water a couple of times a day. The way that it looks right now is half of the jar is filled with this kind of off-white acorn flour, and then the other half is filled with water, and the water is turning a kind of amber brown color as the tannins are getting leached out of the flour. So it is a bit tedious, and it has to be done twice a day for about a week. So there's a lot of care and feeding of the acorn flour process, which probably has a lot to do with why people don't process acorn flour much anymore. But it's going to be so worth it when I'm baking with my own acorn flour. I decided to spare you the repetitive details of leaching the tannins from the ground acorns. After a number of rounds of refreshing the water in the jar, the acorns no longer tasted bitter. At that point, I strained it all. Next, I spread out the ground acorns onto baking sheets and dehydrated them in my fancy toaster oven, which also has a dehydrator setting. You could also use your oven at the lowest setting with the door propped open. At that point, it was still pretty coarse, like almond flour. I wanted something more like all-purpose flour. I tried milling it in a coffee grinder, which worked pretty well, but I could only do about a half cup at a time. So then I tried it in the Vitamix, and that worked equally as well and could handle a lot more flour at a time. Wow. It smells really good. It smells kind of toasty and sweet, a little bit nutty, and it's pretty fine. Fine enough to bake with, which I promptly did. I baked them into some brownies. I replaced 1/3 of the all-purpose flour with acorn flour. The results were mixed. The brownies were a bit crumbly, and I don't know if that was the recipe or the acorn flour. It wasn't a fudgy style of brownie to begin with. Now, as far as taste, the flavor, I feel like there's a subtle acorn flavor in there. There's something kind of warm and nutty about it. So, as Mel and I talked about earlier, It's not exactly the spectacular taste of acorn flour that makes me want to go through all this rigmarole. It's something more like satisfaction that motivates me. It's a good feeling knowing acorns are out there if we need them. That's it for the show this week. You can listen to all episodes of our special series, Earth Eats Wild, through your favorite podcast app, including YouTube, or find them on our website, eartheats.org. Next week, we have a brand new special Fun Drive episode. Then it's 2 more Eats Wild shows featuring foraged treats like elderberries, staghorn sumac, toasted ginkgo nuts, pawpaw, and even a Midwestern wild rice from tribal waters in Michigan. Be sure to tune in for these final episodes of Earth Eats before the launch of our exciting new arts and culture program, Nice Work. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. The Earth Eats team includes Eobon Binder, Alex Chambers, Toby Foster, Leo Pies, Daniela Richardson, Samantha Schimenauer, and we partner with Harvest Public Media. Special thanks this week to Mel Gilman. Earth Eats is produced and edited by me, Kate Young. Our theme music is composed by Aaron Toby and performed by Aaron and Matt Toby. Additional music on the show comes to us from Universal Production Music. Our executive producer is Eric Bolstridge.